Good afternoon and most welcome to 1499 of the highest series. It is one half into the second millennium, almost 1500 episodes.
Hooray!
Hooray, hooray, it's amazing. And we will today go back to something I ended in 1383. And it's an article by Stephen M. Rosen. How can we signify being? Semiotics and Topological Self-Signification, from the journal Cosmos and History, the Journal of Natural and Social Philosophy, 2014. And I will continue where we left off at 1383, and we began looking to the twist of the torus and how that starts everything. It's often something called chirality in modern jargon. It's the twist that makes it a Klein bottle. It can actually be twisted two different ways. That goes also for the most famous Möbius strip. It can be left twisted and right twisted. A left twisted Möbius strip and a right twisted Möbius strip together makes a Klein bottle. The twistedness it was make the Klein bottle. It cannot be constructed without a twist. It is showing that space and temporality itself is the twist. So I continue with the article. It's page 264, and it's the last paragraph beginning with mathematicians. Mathematicians are aware that a form that penetrates itself in a given number of dimensions can be produced without cutting a hole if an added dimension is available. My comment here, it's the twist that is the added dimension. So it's not a twist in space, it's a twist that is space. The point is nicely illustrated by mathematician Rudolf Rucker. He asks us to imagine a species of flatlanders attempting to assemble a Möbius strip. He asks us to imagine a species of flatlanders attempting to assemble a Möbius strip. Rucker shows that since the physical, and this is very important, externally experienced reality of these creatures would be limited to 2 dimensions. When they would try to make an actual model of the Möbius, they would be forced to cut a hole in it. Of course, no such problem of the Möbius intersecting itself arises for us human beings, who have full access to 3 external dimensions. What is problematic for us in the making of the Klein bottle, requiring as it would a fourth dimension? Try as we might, we find no such dimension out there in which to execute this operation. So in this is the external dimension versus an internal twist, if you like. I suggest that the fourth dimension needed to complete the formation of the Klein bottle engages, and listen now, the inner dimension of human being. Here we have the twist. It is not just another arena for reflection, one that stretches before us as does classical space. Rather, it is folded within us, entailing the pre-reflective depths of our subjectivity. The critical distinction between conventional and phenomenological interpretations of the Klein bottle hinges on their different ways of dealing with the fourth dimension, in citation marks. the critical distinction between conventional and phenomenological interpretations of the Klein bottle hinges on their different ways of dealing with the fourth dimension. Very important. It's an ocean of difference here. And this reflects a different understanding of space and dimension in general. To say the least, is my comment. Conventional and phenomenological approaches to Kleinian dimension In his essay I and Mind, Merleau-Ponty emphasizes the absolute positivity of traditional Cartesian space. For Descartes, space is simply there, possessing, listen now, no faults or nuances. It is the utterly explicit openness, the sheer positive extension that constitutes the field of strictly external relations, wherein unambiguous measurements can be made. Might be the best definition I ever heard about Cartesian space. Sheer positiveness. Merleau-Ponty speaks of this space without hiding places, which in each of its points is only what it is. This space without hiding places, which in each of its points is only what it is. Space in itself, rather, it is the in itself par excellence. Its definition is to be in itself. Every point of space is and is thought to be right where it is. One here, another there. Space is the evidence of the where. Its definition is to be in itself. Every point of space is and is thought to be right where it is. One here, another there. Space is the evidence of the where. The citation mark. Space remains absolutely in itself, everywhere equal to itself, homogeneous. Its dimensions, for example, are interchangeable. End of the quote from AI in Mind. Merleau-Ponty concludes that, for Descartes, space is purely positive being, outside all points of view, beyond all latency and all depth, having no true thickness, no depth. This is the point from nowhere. Or we can say that in the Cartesian tradition, a space or dimension is essentially regarded as a continuum. An infinitely dense extension composed of point elements that themselves are entirely unextended, devoid of any inner structure, thus possessing no gradations of depth, no shading, texture, or nuance, no contrasts or distinctions of any sort. Fantastic sentence. It's just as clear as it gets. A condition of total exposure prevails for the point elements of the continuum, since these elements, having no interior recesses, must be said to exist solely on the outside. This is the real McCoy. All that can be said of the relations among such eviscerated beings is what Heidegger said. The points of classical space are outside of one another. This is, of course, also in sharp contrast to the Calor-Rovelli thesis of quantum relativity, to put a quantum physical aspect on it. If space is classically conceived as absolute positivity, so too are the objects embedded in this space. As Merleau-Ponty put it, orientation, polarity, envelopment are, in space-derived phenomena, inextricably bound to my presence. That is to say, our thumb and forefinger sorry, that is to say, our experience of the negative aspects of objects, their hidden faces, their unseen inner recesses, is a mere artifact of our perceptual limitations as beings who can view the world only from our finite perspectives. But the objects themselves, embedded as they are in a spatial context, constituting full-fledged positivity, must, at least in principle, be fully open to observation, measurement and analysis, since the space that contains them affords them no hiding places. There is no innerness, there are no properties, there is no thickness or depth. There are no bodies nor any souls. What of the subject? Whereas classical space is constituted by sheer positive extension, and the objects extended therein are likewise strictly positive beings, the Cartesian subject is utterly negative, nowhere to be found within the spatial continuum. This is made clear in Merleau-Ponty's reflection on Sartre's being and nothingness, where Merleau-Ponty associates classical being with the en soi, the pure positivity of the object, and the nothingness with the pour soi, the total negativity of the subject. The specific role played by space in this splitting of subject and object is to lock the object in the continuum and lock the subject out. Here, the fact that we cannot assemble a proper model of the bottle in three-dimensional space is not seen as an obstacle. In the standard mathematical analysis of the Klein bottle, the division of the subject and object is maintained. Maybe I jumped a step there. Was it correct?
Which word?
No, I think I was correct.
Bourgeois.
See. Thank you. Thank you. Here, the fact that we cannot assemble a proper model of the bottle in three-dimensional space is not seen as an obstacle. The modern mathematician does not limit himself or herself to the concrete reality of space, but feels free to invoke any number of higher dimensions. So a modern mathematician sort of uses the sheer positivity of space to solve the problem of the interpenetration of the subject en soi. Notice though that in summoning into being these extra dimensions, the mathematician is extrapolating from the classically known three-dimensionality of the concrete world. This procedure of dimensional proliferation is an act of abstraction that presupposes that the nature of dimensionality itself is left unchanged. This is not something that is thought about a lot, that the abstraction holds and leaves the dimensionality of the lower three dimensions intact. In the case of the Klein bottle, the fourth dimension required to complete its formation remains an extensive continuum, though this higher space is acknowledged as but a formal construct. The Klein bottle per se is regarded as an abstract mathematical object simply contained in this hyperspace. We see here how the conventional analysis of the Klein bottle unswervingly adheres to the classical formulation of objects in space. Moreover, whether a mathematical object must be approached through hyperdimensional abstraction, or it is concretizable, the mathematician's attention is always directed outward. toward an object, toward that which is cast before his or her subjectivity. In this tradition, subjectivity is taken as the detached position from which all objects are viewed, whatever we have, or better perhaps, from which all is viewed as object. But, and this is important, never is subjectivity as such open to view. So subjectivity is not reached here. We don't know what the subjectivity is blocked out in the Cartesian positive space. Thus, the posture of contemporary mathematics is faithfully aligned with that of Descartes in whatever topic it may be addressing. Always there is the mathematical object, could be a geometric form or algebraic function, the continuous space in which the object is contained, and the seldom acknowledged uncontained subjectivity of the mathematician who is carrying out the analysis. So it's clear here that Stephen Rosen eloquently and clear, I don't think I heard it any more clearly, taken of course with the help of Merleau-Ponty and Hooker, expose the Cartesian space that is ever present in all thinking nowadays, and shows in quite another way than we discussed earlier how it blocks out the subject. It is within the domain of the potentialities in the Cartesian space not to have a subject. How could there be a subject? Only as an object in the homogeneous space, not as the mathematician doing the mathematics, or the physician, or everyday people. We are Entwurft, as Heidegger would say it. We are participatory. Words that we've been pondering since the very first episodes of this extensive series. Maybe one of the longest ever on YouTube, I imagine. Since the hundreds, when we began with Heidegger. But now Rosen and Merleau-Ponty puts it into something that you can touch and see. You can understand what the Cartesian space does, its benefits. It's without a doubt sine qua non for Newtonian space and the modern space. But also its other aspects, since its sheer positivity, the only thing left for the subject is negativity. There is no longer a movement, it's a standstill. And as an Indian Tiyuka Singh, which I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, said, he felt the deadness of the objects in front of him in space, no longer living or verbal. And it's most clarifying, at least for me, who is a bit more mathematically inclined, how modern mathematicians takes away the problem of the Klein bottle by doing the illicit, I would say, abstraction of the ordinary three dimensions, creating a fourth dimension. They assume that the remaining three dimensions would remain the same. And I would also put in, they also assume that the fourth invented dimension would be in some way similar to the ones we're used to. There seem to be a lot of assumptions smothering here in the pot. And they are most seldom approached. Rosen is in this case unique. We live in a subjectless world, and here clearly it's pointed out why it's subjectless. Because our very thinking, our understanding process has implicitly, almost explicitly, no subject whatsoever. It's an unknown origin. And it's a classically fantastic way of rephrasing Thomas Nagel's A Point from Nowhere. Might as well be a point from anywhere. Maybe a comment from my colleague here. Kalle, put this on you. Well, I could put it on the, what's it called in English?
Hello. So I will repeat one phrase from page 265. 265. It's, if you want to find it, 265. It's the fourth line. The critical distinction between conventional and phenomenological interpretations of the clam bottle hinges on the different ways of dealing with the fourth dimension. I'm not certain that I understand what he means. I have my own proposal. What could be the difference? So in phenomenology, you would probably include the subject, while in conventional mathematics, you would probably see Klampert or something different from yourself as outside. In phenomenology, you would, so to say, perhaps personify the Klampert. So it's like it's an image of ourselves. Like you see the Klampert, it goes inside. That would be almost, I would say, like our throat almost, that goes inside. But the fourth dimension there would be the throat in the clam bottle. But I don't know. Perhaps I'm reading too much. So how would you understand that phrase, Hans? I will put this back to you. Would you please remove this? I don't want to.
No hurry. It's a very delicate thing, this. My dear friend Jan Eiskens sees the body as a Klein bottle. The throat going through the system as the interpenetration in the bodily fashion. Yeah, we'll say that's correct. We are participating in space, and as Heidegger would have it, we've forgotten that, or as Stephen M. Rosen and Merleau-Ponty would say, it is blocked out because of the very way we think. So if I'm here in this cafe, I would try not to show the other punters. I would make a sort of a mental map where everyone is placed. If I were to remember them or get a picture of them, this abstraction is not correct. This is not how the world is constructed. Spatiality is curve. The curve, the handedness, is in the Klein bottle consisting of two Möbius strips, one left-handed and one right-handed. That spirality is what space is, not an anonymous, homogeneous, sterile extension that blocks certain features of space. And they do it, and this is very important, they do it in a random fashion. It's not generalizing or universalizing, it's random, because it's not a true nature of space. And therein lies the problem.
Can you turn? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. I got an idea. And now I will simplify extremely. But sometimes simplifications are good. So I repeat this phrase because it's important. The critical distinction between conventional and phenomenological interpretation of the clam bottle hinges on the different ways of dealing with the fourth dimension. So here comes my simplification. So what is the difference between conventional and phenomenological interpretations? So in conventional interpretations, you would say everything is depersonalized. You're looking from the outside. While in phenomenology, you can think about the first letter in phenomenology. Phenomenology, personification. So phenomenology wants to personify space. Like in Glam bottle is an image of the human being. So phenomenology, personification. I think this is my simplification. I think I'm satisfied with this oversimplification. So what do you think about that?
Very good. I agree. Yes, that's what it is. Put a pause there, and I go out for some air. Now, in his phenomenological study of topology, the mathematician Stephen Barr advised that we should not be intimidated by the higher mathematician. We must not be put off because he is interested only in the higher abstractions. We have an equal right to be interested in the tangible. The tangible fact about the Klein bottle that is glossed over in the higher abstractions of modern mathematics is its whole. I think in this context you should remember the lack of whole in the Parmenian viewpoint, where everything is dense. Because the standard approach has always presupposed extensive continuity, it cannot come to terms with the inherent discontinuity of the Klein bottle created by its self-intersection. because the standard approach has always presupposed extensive continuity, it cannot come to terms with the inherent discontinuity of the Klein bottle created by its self-intersection. This is, of course, expressed as horror vacui. Therefore, all too quickly, higher mathematics circumvents this concrete whole by an act of abstraction in which the Klein bottle is treated as a properly closed object embedded in hyperdimensional continuum. I think this is very good. I will press that extra strongly. Therefore, all too quickly, higher mathematics circumvents this concrete whole by an act of abstraction in which the Klein bottle is treated as a properly closed object embedded in a hyperdimensional continuum. Problem solved, according to the abstract mathematicians. Fool's gone. And the continuum is protected. Also implicit in the mainstream approach is the detached subjectivity of the mathematician before whom the object is cast. I suggest that by staying with the whole, we may bring into question the classical intuition of object in space before subject. Let us look more closely at the hole in the Klein bottle. This loss in continuity is necessary, and I will press that a lot. It is absolutely necessary for our understanding function to be. Without the interpenetration of the subject, no understanding at all is possible. One certainly could make a hole in the Möbius strip, torus, or any other object in three-dimensional space, but such discontinuities would not be necessary inasmuch as these objects could be properly assembled in space without rupturing them. It is clear that whether such objects are cut open or left intact, the closure of the space containing them will not be brought into question. In rendering these objects discontinuous, we do not affect the assumption that the space in which they are embedded is simply continuous. With the Klein bottle, it is different. Its discontinuity does speak to the supposed continuity of three-dimensional space itself, for the necessity of the hole in the bottle indicates that space is unable to contain the bottle the way ordinary objects appear containable. We know that if the Kleinian object is properly to be closed, assembled without a hole, an added dimension is required. And here is also an astonishing connection to Einsteinian relativity, where a fourth dimension is installed in order to solve the problems inherent in three dimensions. A little spoiler alert, the fourth dimension in the Einsteinian take created other paradoxes, singularities. Thus, for the Klein bottle to be accommodated, the three-dimensional continuum must in some way be opened up, its continuity open to a challenge. Thus, for the Klein bottle to be accommodated, the three-dimensional continuum must in some way be opened up, its continuity open to a challenge. Of course, we could attempt to sidestep the challenge, to skip over the whole by continuity maintaining act of abstraction, as in the standard mathematical analysis of the Klein bottle. Of course, we could attempt to sidestep the challenge, to skip over the whole by continue maintaining act of abstraction. It's very tempting, and that's the path that most mathematicians and physicians are taking. Assuming we do not employ this stratagem, what conclusion are we led to regarding the higher dimension that is required for the completion of the Klein bottle?
Lite. Jag får kaffe så mycket. Vi går det på måndag.
If it is not an extensive continuum, what sort of dimension is it? I suggest it is what Merleau-Ponty called the depth dimension.
Jag tänkte man kommer. Passar det. Det är samma som de hade.
Eschewing the superficial account of depth given in the Cartesian tradition, and this is, I'm going to read the parenthesis as well. It is merely the dimension added to height and width to make up the third dimension of classical space. This is also mentioned by Ian McGilchrist as a representation of three dimensions without a felt dimension. Merleau-Ponty begins his own account of dimensionality by exploring the paradoxical interplay of the visible and invisible, of identity and difference, that is characteristic of true depth. And I need to put a comment here, will be a little beside the point, but I think it's still pertinent, and that's that the twist, the handedness, is the first difference, bar anyone. It comes first. The enigma consists in the fact that I see things, each one in its place, precisely because they eclipse one another and that they are rivals before my sight, precisely because each one is in its own place. Their exteriority is known in their envelopment and their mutual dependence in their autonomy. In the first place, if it were a dimension, it would be the first one. There are forms and definite planes only if it is stipulated how far from me that different parts are. But a first dimension that contains all the others is no longer a dimension, at least in the ordinary sense of a certain relationship, according to which we make measurements. But a first dimension that contains all the others is no longer a dimension, at least in the ordinary sense of a certain relationship, according to which we make measurements. Depth, thus understood, is rather the experience of the reversibility of dimensions, of a global locality, everything in the same place at the same time, a locality from which height, width, and depth, the classical dimensions, are abstracted. Merleau-Ponty speaks of a first dimension that gives rise to all the others, from where they are abstracted. Now we go into the subject of true dimensionality. From where the orthogonal perpendicular directions stem, and it proves that the orthogonal perpendicular directions of the Cartesian scheme are derivative, and they are not from space itself, other than secondarily. I always see this as a byproduct of the Cartesian coordinate system, and living in that is the same as having to make do with the spoils of a great dinner. What little sauce and crumpets are left, maybe half a potato, not making up a proper dinner. You can also compare to fractality to help ease the understanding. Fractality doesn't take the dimensions 1, 2, or 3, but instead all the dimensions in between. I would say this is more similar to the original primordial one dimension of the Cartesian antithesis in Merleau-Ponty. And why the whole is the subject in many ways of seeing it. The whole is the entering into space itself. And can you see this is a twistedness? This is handedness itself. The primordial original aspect of reality. The true first difference. and why we feel a necessity for reintroducing dimensions to make space continuous, this utter urge to escape the challenge of the whole, to once more eradicated the subject that turned its ugly face up. The same urge for continuity as we see already in Parmenides, but now brought even higher up to ridding the world from the subject or the whole. Merleau-Ponty and Stephen M. Rosen is pointing to that in the very space itself, whole is an absolute necessity. Without a whole, there couldn't be any observation. There couldn't be an understanding. This is oddly very close to the Wittgensteinian use of language game that he says, for meaning to be effective, it cannot be the same level as perception or inner talk. And how we in everyday language fumbles on language. We don't really understand its usable aspects. We're trying to get rid of the whole, and it seems that we are then left choiceless. It's an excellent exposure of the accused Cartesian dimensions. I go a little bit like from the book J'accuse, in the Dreyfus trial. J'accuse, I accuse the Cartesian dimensionality for the lack of a subject and lack of time and lack of a directionality. Maybe a comment from my dear colleague here.
No.
There you go.
Thank you. Thank you. We have speaking about the following homonymy also in the past in Stephen M. Rosen's papers. Whole and whole, that is the word with the 4 letters beginning with an H, and the whole with 5 letters with a W. And that is a significant homonymy. You can sometimes put the W within parentheses to play with that in text. And the whole corresponds to the Derridean cut. Cut is or circumcision and everything else. Cut is necessary to arrive to the wholeness with W. My question is, does the cut or the whole with an H correspond to the 3rd dimension or the 4th dimension, or both perhaps at the same time? Or how should we understand the cut? Which dimension is it? Or is it a stupid question? I don't know.
No, it's a good question. This is a difficult subject. I would liken the necessary cut, you can take it as in circumcision, why not? The male lingam is a fold, and the male lingam, it's called a lingam. It's a fold, and that fold is necessary for it to be a lingam. The cut is the same as the whole. Yes, excellent. Without the whole, there can be no perception, can be no understanding, because the interpenetrative movement is no longer there. And there is a strange sort of static stillness. Or I would call that a heaviness in thinking. and heaviness in understanding. One thing that is very important is to understand that the Cartesian dimensionality is a derived feature of the truer space that starts with a cut or handedness. Handedness is in itself a necessity for there to be the other dimensions. So you can see those dimensions as stemming from the other ones. They are the starting point where everything is born out of, a truer fountain for dimensions. And the only way of making a whole is by self-intersection. That is also very important. I will read on page 267. Because the standard approach has always presupposed extensive continuity, it cannot come to terms with the inherent discontinuity of the Klein bottle created by its self-intersection. So that regular whole in the Cartesian dimensionality is just sheer negativity in an emotional sense, and in a geometrical sense, and in a physical sense. So one could say in a way that whole becomes something that we stare away from, something to be avoided, horror vacui, all the way from antiquity, but also in modern day thinking where absence is not seen as subjectivity. Instead, we turned our subjects into an object in Cartesian space, looking at ourselves from a global perspective. Thereby ridding all of the glory, the energy, the thrust, the pretension into the future, which makes the future, of subjectivity, making subjectivity an illicit guest in the Cartesian perfection of continuum. So we defy subjectivity. We see it as a fault almost in the construction of the world. Something to eradicate. And that is given with the model we think with. Only when we let the whole be whole can we have WHOLE, whole, as in wholeness. And I think getting rid of the whole is shares some similarities to the autoimmune thinking of modern day. Trying to rid the whole, our subjectivity in our very thinking makes possibly thinking the cause of all autoimmune diseases because it attacks itself. It goes to active attack to itself, trying to enforce its tyranny, I would say even, of sheer continuity, blankness, positivity, lack of extension, defying all properties of the world. It's self-sufficient as well, as we can read from I and Mine by Merleau-Ponty. This space without hiding places, which is each of its points is only what it is. Space is itself. Rather, it is in itself par excellence. Its definition is to be in itself. It doesn't need anything else, or at least this is what it claims, or we claims. Because in the end, it's only the whole that can claim that. Only the whole has the thrust to make any claims. When we enter, we can make claims. Our words can ring true. We get in this way a voice. And it's easy to how this first Cartesian space with their orthogonal perpendicular directions going from a starting point that doesn't even have an existence, the origo. That is instead of the positive, of the subject. It's a dummy. I think it's never been easier to see how also this fits nicely with Ian McGilchrist's left hemisphere take, which maybe many people still after reading Ian McGilchrist thinks it's a possible space. No, without the whole, without the interpenetration that makes a whole, there is no time, there is no movement, there is no perception of, and therefore, oddly enough, there can be no object either. In the Vedic tradition, both Purusha and Prakriti disappears. Observer and observed come to disappearing stances and do not function anymore. And it's also clear here how constructed the three dimensions are. Because take the example of making a fourth one, then we really understand this is an illicit abstraction. We don't know if the other three dimensions keep their features, their doings, while adding a fourth. It comes to life again, and it's, I say, this text is just marvelous. There will be a link so you can download it and read it. And please send a note to Stephen M. Rosen himself. He's a very sharp and smart person. I say thank you very much, and have a very pleasant afternoon, which I think it is. Bye-bye for now. We end with a name of the coffee shop.